thank you for making the time to chat with me, to chat with really us. This is a collaborative experience here. Why don't we start with some intros? All of you are friends of mine, so I will not introduce you, but I would rather have you introduce yourself. Is that cool? Maybe we can start from here. You can maybe say your name, what you work on, and what pets you have, if any, just to be relatable. And then we can pass it down this way, okay?
So, is this working? Yes. Okay, hello everyone. Hi, I'm Aditi, and I work at Igalia. And I'm a TC39 delegate, and I have been working for TC39 stuff for over a year now. And I work on all sorts of TC39 things. I have worked on implementations. I worked on spec text, and I have also worked on tests. So feel free to ask. And I don't have any pets.
Hi, I'm Nicolo. I'm also part of TC39, that's why I'm sitting here. I maintain Babel, the JavaScript compiler. Hope some of you have heard about.
Like SWC, but different.
Yes, it's kind of like SWC. It's like a bit older and slower. And I have pets. If I knew about this question, I would prepare a picture of my pet. Unfortunately, his name's Timmy. He's a nice dog. It's the best dog I've ever met. He's very nice. I hope one day you will be able to meet him. And yeah, that's all for me.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Luca. I work on Dino. I've been at TC39 since, I don't know, like a year and a half maybe now. I've been doing proposals mostly, proposing features to JavaScript modules, also known as ECMAScript modules, and various other things. And yeah, Dino is the thing I work on. And I don't have any pets either.
Hey, I'm Ujjwal. I work at Igalia, do a bunch of programming languages and standard stuff. I have been co-chairing TC39 for a while now, so that's fun. And yeah, I mostly work around specifications for internationalization. I love languages, which are also not programming languages. And I have 2 baby plants. So.
Good. No, I have this one. Good.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you want another? Let's have another introduction. Why not?
Yeah, I'm Michele. I work as a CTO at Orama Search, and I joined TC39 as a delegate like 2 weeks ago. So this is a bit improvised, I would say, right?
Fantastic.
And I have a dog. It's called Linux.
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 Wow,
Yeah.
fantastic. He's gonna, yeah, excellent. I have a dog. It's called Mac OS. I'm just kidding. That was a horrible name for a dog. So, TC39, you mentioned, Michele, that you just joined. You just became a delegate.
Yeah.
And just so that we're on the same page, this laptop is probably going to go to sleep again.
The laptop was not sleeping. The screen was on. Only something was broken.
You're trolling him back there. Nice. So TC39 stands for, if I understand correctly, Technical Committee 39 of ECMA, which is the European Computer Manufacturers Association. Is it exclusively European, or do America? Okay, this is just the name. Okay, cool. So, this committee is responsible for the JavaScript language specification and implementation, as I understand. Okay, you just joined as a delegate. I want to ask you a question about that, but you just raised the mic to your mouth. So,
Yes, so you said implementation. We don't actually implement engines. Like browsers, Google, Apple, I don't know, all the people that build browsers, they do the implementation. We only specify things. So the only thing that we create is a document that says this is how JavaScript works and tests.
And from start to finish for a given feature, I think of something like temporal. What is that process? How long does that process take in specifying something from start to finish?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the kind of feature. Some features go really fast. Some features take a very long time. It depends on the size of the feature. But even before we start writing things, Nico's putting up the stages here. We can explain what those are in just a second. Even before we start ever writing specifications, there's a lot of work that goes into thinking about, is this even something that we want in the language? Like what motivates this? What kind of people might use this? What are like different trade-offs that different proposals might have? All of that happens before we ever start writing any specification text. And writing specification text happens way before anybody ever starts implementing something. So yeah, there's these 4 stages. Does anybody, or 5 stages? Does anybody want to walk through them, or?
Sure. Well, we have a stage process. As Luca pointed out, everything starts at stage 0 because we are JavaScript engineers, so we start counting at 0. Stage 0 for me, it's just like an idea. At stage 0, something could just be, a diagram on a tissue paper. Really, it's an idea, and it is an intent to solve a problem, essentially. The important part here is that rather than focusing on solutions, at this stage, the idea is to focus on the problem. What are you trying to solve? Everything that needs to be added to the language needs to solve some problem. So that's stage 0. It could be in your head, but things start getting official at stage 1. This is where we call it a proposal. So stage 1 is when you go to the committee and you say, hey, I've been thinking about this problem statement, and what if we did something about it, right? So in many ways, stage 1 is just a commitment by the committee, a very weak commitment by the committee to say, this is a valid problem, and we should start investigating this. Do you want me to do the whole thing? Or do you
Yeah, I
want
think that's good. I think maybe one other thing to clarify is when we talk about the committee, what this means is there's a group of people, we didn't clarify this earlier, there's a group of people that meets every 6 to 7 or 8
Every 2 months?
Every 2 months. 3 times a year remotely and 3 times a year in person, hybrid in person, from all different kinds of companies, from Apple, from Google, from Igalia, from Dino, people from OpenJSF, which represent Node.
People from Orama.
Yeah, exactly. A bunch of different people that all have various stakes within JavaScript, and we sit down together and then we discuss these proposals. So when we say go to the committee to do something, that means in one of these meetings, we call these plenary meetings, these are essentially 3 or 4 days long, everybody gives a bunch of presentations. That's what we mean when we say go to the committee and do something.
Okay, and for the sake of time, if we can quickly summarize these stages. So 0 is just a napkin drawing.
Right.
1 says this is valid, and then 2, 3, and 4.
Right. At stage 2, we start getting more serious about things, right? 2 is when we start defining a general shape of the solution. So now we're starting to get to the solution. And it doesn't need to be completely perfect, but it is the stage at which we start really thinking about the problem in terms of what different paths we could take, what are the different ways to solve this, what are the different trade-offs which concern all of these different solutions.
And that's done in a committee with many people are part of that
Right.
conversation.
And one very important aspect of what Luca just mentioned is that the plurality, the diversity of the committee and the stakeholders is very important. Of course, we have browser vendors and implementers, but there are people who rely a lot on JavaScript, or huge libraries, huge websites that care about what happens to the language. So it's important to get everybody on board. And so all of these different parties are coming at the problem and the solutions now with their own points of view, and we try to take all of that into account. One very important feature of the committee is that it works on consensus, so there's no voting. Everything that we do at any point with the language has to be agreed upon by all the members.
Wow.
So it's a very high bar.
So I have 2 questions. How many members are there roughly, if you have that information? And then the second part of the question is, are all members weighted equally? I assume yes, because of the consent. So how many members is that? How many people need to agree before something moves forward?
So it's actually not that everybody has to agree, it's rather that nobody has to disagree.
Okay.
So there's, I think at any given meeting, maybe 50 or 60 people at most, and out of those, maybe 20 or 30 actually speak, and the rest are sitting in the back listening. But part of ECMA and part of people who could join TC39, probably 150 or something in total. Yeah. So there's a lot. But really the bar is nobody has to object. So if anybody feels strongly about something, that's
Okay.
yeah.
And so stage 2 then is you get this buy-in from the broader committee.
And-
And then 3,
Right. So by the end of stage 2, we start nearing a decision among the solutions. We're starting to narrow down on the solution. Stage 3 is when things get super serious. So by the end of stage 2, we finalize the shape of the solution. We discuss things like semantics, things like syntax. How would the solution look like? How would it actually work? Stage 3 is when we say, okay, like we have done all the research we could, we have sit in our fancy chairs and done all the thinking, and now it's time to put this thing in the real world. And that is the point, like when we hit stage 3, it is implemented across the board, hopefully. And stage 3 is when we start factoring important things like feedback from implementations, because people are now actually starting to implement this feature, and they can come back to you and say, hey, that thing you just specified, that is impossible to implement. Like, it just doesn't work.
Is there an example of something like this that has happened? Would one of you be willing to speak to that?
Yes. More than difficult implementations, what happens often is that like engines say, okay, this, like, it's possible to implement this, it will make things much slower. Or another important thing that we get from implementations is that engines say, we implemented this, we tried using this in our browser, and we saw that it's breaking some websites. Some websites don't work anymore when we implement this feature. So you need to change something because we have this like guiding principle.
Never break the web.
Never break anything. Well, not anything. To never break like 99.99%.
Right, but a specific
of websites.
example where an implementer has come to you and said, this is literally impossible, what you specified.
Yeah, so I think like there's two examples. For the first example, for the like it's too difficult to implement, decorators went through many iterations, because the first version of decorators engines were like, if we implement this, like browsers will become, I don't know, 80% slower because we have to throw away our our just-in-time compilers. So we had to change decorators to something that didn't have that problem. And then the other thing is a pretty recent proposal, array, what's it called?
Array.group.
Yeah, array.group, right. There were some old libraries that, on older sites, that added a group function to the array prototype. And they did this in such a way that if the group function does not already exist, then they add on a new group function. And that meant that once we added a standard group function, those sites would not add their own group function anymore. And this new group function didn't behave exactly the same way as the old group function. So then those old sites broke. So what we had to do is we had to come up with a new name for array.group. And I think that's still ongoing.
Yeah, we still don't have a name. Actually, the reason that array.group breaks is even more cursed. A very popular library was checking if group exists on this thing, then do something else without even implementing their own group function. And so just adding group on the array like triggers some pattern that popular library was using many websites developed many years ago, and like that just break and stop working. Even if they didn't actually they weren't actually using some grouping function or anything else. But things happen, and we cannot just break your website by introducing new features in the language.
Yeah, so we're never going to just have like native CSS and JS as a thing. Anyway, cool, thank you. We're just before, so stage 3 is when it gets really serious. The spec is complete at this point, and it's all the committee signs off and it's ready. And then I'm assuming then the 4th stage is just covering it with tests, or what is that?
The 4th stage is it's done.
Okay, it's shipped.
It's shipped, exactly. 4th stage, nothing happens in stage 4.
So we're all using stage 4 JavaScript.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then tests, maybe Aditi can speak to that a little bit when they're added, but they're added in earlier stages already.
Okay, so for tests are actually a requirement at stage 3 before stage 4. So we have a test suite. It's called Test262. And it's actually, Nicola is just going to put that up. It's actually one of the easiest way to contribute to the TC39. And I can explain more on Test262, how these are written, or we do want to discuss anything else before that.
Actually, you mentioned getting involved through this test suite.
Yeah.
And I do want to come back to that, but you just got involved, Michele. And I think there's a prevalent question in the room, if I'm reading the room correctly. How does, is it a closed group of elite hackers, or is it something where, I or anybody else, if they want to influence the language, or if they want to get involved in these discussions, how did you join TC39, and is that in fact something that's open to anybody who's just interested in JavaScript? What does that process look like?
The fact that I'm here proves that there's no elite out there. So first of all, But apart from that, I believe that anyone that is interested in spending a considerable amount of time working on this should be able to join. And of course, there are many ways. One way I'd like to quote, for example, Nicolas, who joined as an invited expert in the first place, right? So you've been invited from the TC39 itself, sorry.
They reached out because of your work on Babel or something.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
as an influential person and as a lead maintainer of an important project for the JavaScript community, I feel like that's a good decision to invite someone like him for joining this. Another way, if you want to join as a delegate, for example, which is my case, in my personal experience, I founded a company, and by paying a fee that depends on the size and the revenue for your company, you can then join the TC39.
So everyone here, if they wanted to, could just join TC39 somehow. And
I guess now it's better if there is Ujwal responding.
Yeah, I think one thing important to note is that you don't need to join structurally ECMA or TC39 in order to start getting involved. I think there's a lot of work you can do, or like a lot of feedback you can give just as a developer. And of course, all these people who are designing these different changes are always, they are mostly very open to feedback, and they really appreciate like a community perspective, because what can happen is that sometimes, we were joking about this with Nicolo the other day, when you're designing something perhaps even full-time for a long time, you tend to sometimes lose perspective, and it's very enlightening to have somebody from the outside just give you a little bit of that perspective. So there's so many ways to get involved. I think Aditi will soon tell you about writing tests. So that's a big thing. We need to make sure that everything that we specify is actually followed on the web. Otherwise, we get a mess of non-conforming browsers and other vendors. And yeah, so that's the sort of earliest levels at which you can get involved. And of course, you can then go on to be invited as an expert if you have like a very concrete stake in something specific, or you can join as a delegate if you're interested in like general purpose.
right, and that's
the direction.
you'd pay a fee proportionate to the size of your company to be a delegate. Excellent.
But I also like to share, for example, we first met with Ujwal last year exactly here at BJS Conf, and I was like, yeah, I want to get involved, and he started throwing me like, okay, polyfills. And I've been spending 1 year like providing coordination over creation of polyfills for internationalizations, basic features for JavaScript. And this is an amazing way to get involved and get up to date with what's going on. And you don't need to be a delegate or an invited expert to do that.
Excellent. I want to speak a little bit, to have you speak a little bit to the testing setup and how that works, how tests are run, and how I think more importantly, how people can contribute as like an in. And once that's done, I do want to open it up to you for questions. So now get thinking about the questions while we also dive into the tests.
I just want to add 1 second that, like Ujwal
No,
mentioned,
not allowed.
everyone can give feedback. Like I've been showing some pages from this TC39 GitHub org, and like everything happens on GitHub. So like you can just find a repository for every proposal. You can like open issues, and it's like collaborating for any other open source project. Like there is no some special like unknown form where things happen, or like it's all public here. So like you can just check and like give your opinions and like.
That's an important thing. Like everything we do in TC39 is completely public, to a fault even sometimes. All the meeting notes about everything we discuss are posted to the public, and yeah, all the channels for communication are public. So all you need to do is join in.
Okay.
The only difference between like any other open source project and TC39 is that like things happen very slowly. Like you open an issue and people will respond to you and things will happen, but before you see anything concrete in browsers, it could take years, right? Like you need to be patient. Things don't happen overnight. We only have 6 meetings a year. There's a lot of work that happens asynchronously, but like every time to go between one of these stages, this can only happen at one of the meetings. There's 5 stages. This means it takes at least 4 meetings to go from stage 0 to stage 4. And like rarely happens that fast.
Right,
So,
and it's also that slow because you want to protect the web
Exactly,
and not just willy-nilly break stuff.
yeah,
left and
we need
right.
to make sure that people have enough time to give feedback, that people can think about this. Like, there's a lot of proposals going on, and people don't have infinite time. People have other work that they have to get done. So we have to leave enough time for everybody to give the feedback, and
Awesome.
I think it's a good.
Let's talk about tests.
Okay. So for tests, so the spec text that we have, it's not actual code, and each engine implements it differently. So to make sure that the implementation is exactly how we want it and it's the exact functionality, we have this test suite. It's called Test262. And so the Test262 has, like, we have tests for each and everything, almost every line of the spec text. And we wrote tests for this proposal, array.from async. And it's a stage 3 proposal right now, and I'll just briefly explain what the proposal does. So it's just array.from, but for async iterators, right? So when we started writing tests for this, we prepared a testing plan, and this plan actually shows that we cover everything, that we have some standard tests, we have tests for arguments, and for all the arguments actually. And so this is for all the arguments, right? And you don't necessarily have to do this, have a testing plan, but it's a good thing to have. So now I'll just show an example test from this testing plan.
Like these are all tests, like 50 tests for a single very small function. in the
For a
language.
single function, yes. So this is how a test looks like. And I'll go through the test line by line, but just to match it with the spec. So we have, so the info here, if you can see it, it says if the map function is undefined, and it just mentioned this specific line of the spec text that it's testing. So we can go to the spec, so this is the spec, there are the arguments, and there's the map function. So you can see line number 3A, and it says 3A BI, right? If the map function is not callable, we throw a type error. So that's exactly what this test does. And so the first two lines are just copyright and the license. Then we have the block comment, followed by 3 dashes. So the stuff in between this is YAML. And we have several keys. And some of them are required, some of them are not. And the ESID is basically, okay, so if you go to permalink in the spec text, so the thing you see after the hash symbol, that's what ESID is. So
it makes it easy to reference between the tests and the spec.
Test and the spec. So the description is just one or two line which describes what this test is about. It doesn't have to be a paragraph, it's very short and concise. The info is sort of, if you want to write some detailed description about it, it's not required, but it's good to have. Then we have flags and includes. So it is about if there are any helper files that we have included, and then it's just the features that it has, okay? And this is the test. So we are testing for all the non-callable functions and just checking if they throw a type error.
You test the JavaScript language specification with JavaScript.
Yes.
What runs the test? Is there some special runtime that runs this new version of JavaScript that is not yet stage 4 that can run this code?
Yeah, so for most proposals, we have polyfills, and they have their own test runners. And there is a Test262 runner in this suite, which we can use. And also each implementation, like WebKit or like V8, they have their own Test262 runners. So they test their implementations using that.
So because tests are not really for testing the language itself, they're for making sure that implementations all agree on what is the shared specification of the language. So we don't actually test the spec, we test the implementation. So for example, Chrome would run these tests internally to test their own features.
Right, excellent. Any questions in the, oh wow, okay, there's a few. My throwing arm isn't very strong, so let's start maybe with the back. Show me your hands at the back if you, okay, I see you. I'm gonna hit you, probably, just duck. So, there we go. Nice, wow, good.
Thank you. I just want to ask, who is sponsoring all this work in TC39?
So the work is sponsored by the member companies. So I work at Dino, and as part of my, the amount of hours I spend every week working at Dino, part of that time is spent working on TC39 things. So it's the member companies, and like for example, Igalia is an open source consultancy. They are paid by people that, ask them to work on specific JavaScript features that they need. So they may be paid by those companies. In your case, you're the CTO of Amara Search, so like you will probably be paid by your employer, and yeah.
Like, often companies pay for this because like their goal in TC39 is to like somehow like make language better for their own developers so that they like are more like productive, or maybe just making things easier for what this company, like for what's their product. Like maybe he could have like an array.search function to make his whole company just a single line of
Maybe
code.
I just want your proposals on records and typos to be finally landing because I really need it.
In general, companies don't do it just like because it's something like for the greater good. Like it's because it's something they actually need and that they can make their developer happier, like simplify the lives of the developers.
So companies might drive the proposals that you accept or not.
For sure.
I didn't.
You said
Can
companies,
you repeat the
so
question?
that companies might drive the proposals that you work on.
Yeah, usually proposals are, like, there's not all delegates work on all proposals. That's just not feasible. So usually every proposal we don't call this sponsoring, we call this, what do we call it? Championing. There's a group of people that champion a given proposal. And for example, like Dino, we're very interested in features related to module syntax because we use ES modules for a lot of things. So we champion proposals that work on module syntax, and we collaborate on that a lot.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like all the member companies are trying to work around their interests and their products. To give an example, like most of the work that goes around in internationalization is actually sponsored or pushed by organizations who build huge websites. And they have a vested interest to have internationalization, good internationalization for their products, because what are their options? Otherwise, they either do their own thing, which means that they have to include a lot of this data that is used for internationalization for every website. That slows down all of their products. Or they have to stick to whatever primitive tools that already exist to do the same thing, which might not be great, and that might not have a great user experience.
Right, great. And the question, can you just throw it, man? I don't have the strength for that. Whoa, nice. Violence is happening.
Got it. Hello. You've talked a lot about browser engines, and you haven't talked about server-side JavaScript engines. And I'm wondering how TC39 feels about WinterCG, the Web Interoperability Control Group.
Yeah, so just to clarify, we don't represent all of TC39, so we can't make blanket statements about TC39 feels one way or another. TC39 is a group of people, so I can talk for myself.
This is the equivalent of ChatGPT saying, as a large language AI model,
Exactly.
I can't have feelings about things.
I may be slightly biased because I happen to also be the chair of WinterCG. For those who are not aware, WinterCG is a community group at the W3C that works on interoperable server-side JavaScript runtime, so making sure that programs that work in Dino also work in Node, also work in Cloudflare Workers, work on Nullify Edge functions, work on Vercel Edge runtime, and so on. I think it's great, but I don't know what other people think.
So, like WinterCG and TC39 operate in slightly different spaces because the way JavaScript, as we all know it, works is that it's split into different parts. There is like the core part of JavaScript, which is what TC39 standardized, and it works the same everywhere. And then there are like all the web APIs and all the server-side APIs, and those are outside of TC39, standardized by their bodies, like W3C or WinterCG and others. So like we don't really overlap much.
And this is not immediately obvious to everyone, so let me clarify this. There's a difference between what we call web APIs, which are things that are specific to browsers. For example, the Fetch API. Fetch API is not part of JavaScript. It's part of browsers. It's a web API. It's specified by WhatWig. WhatWig is another sort of standards group which only the browsers participate in, which other runtimes also may use, but it's not a JavaScript thing. It's a web thing. So there's sort of the split there.
Right, the boundary between the engine and the runtime, effectively.
Boundaries, like you have to ask yourself, would this JavaScript function make sense on my dishwasher? If it does, then it's standardized by 39. If it doesn't, it's probably in some other standards body.
Right. We have time literally for one more question. So if you really, really want to ask your question, put your hand up like really high.
And also, if you have other questions, feel free to ask us later. during
Exactly.
lunch.
You're around. So one more question. There we go. Kyle Simpson. Let's give it your best throw. Oh my gosh.
Don't hit there's a camera in the middle. They don't hit it, please.
It's like target practice over there. All right. This is the last one, Kyle. Let's have it.
I'm curious about stage 0 specifically, since many of the people in this room either don't work for a company that's a member or whatever. So let's say somebody has an idea for a feature. Maybe there's another language they've worked in and they wish this feature was in JavaScript, or they wish there was some additional idea. They probably don't have all of the backstory that TC39 has about maybe that idea has come up before, maybe it's been rejected for some reason. So what are some practical ways that somebody could actually get something to be a stage 0 considered by TC39 if they're not on it? They don't have somebody who's an advocate championing for them, but they would like their idea considered.
Thank you for the question. There's, as you mentioned, to give a little background, the championing part is very important here. If you are not a member of TC39 already, then you can, of course, start working on new ideas, but you would need somebody who's on the committee to champion that proposal. They would need to actually present it before the rest of the group and do the motions. You can do everything else. You can help design it. You can even help implement it, but somebody needs to represent the proposal at the end of the day to the committee. So that's the champion part. On your own side, what you can do is everything else. You can start with user research, for example, which is something that we could not have enough of, right? And that's usually the first step. There's a lot of design that can go on. There's different avenues where you can go to discuss these things. Of course, GitHub is an obvious one, but we have a discourse. The discourse is...
That's not a Discord. No. Okay. Discourse is different.
Discourse is different. Discourse is like a mailing list forum mix, which is, it's kind of like GitHub discussions, but before GitHub discussions. So that's a nice place where a lot of people I know outside of TC39 like to iterate on ideas, and that's a way to get different people who are working on TC39 to engage with them. And of course, there's different chat channels that you can join. I suppose we can flash a link to most of them at the end.
Yeah,
Great.
and we mentioned that you need a champion to progress a proposal, but there are proposals that have been started by the community, and then the community found someone to champion them. Like my favorite one of those is like the pipeline operator that was born from normal people. I mean, from
We're all normal people.
yeah,
Don't
normal
hate this.
people, from people outside of TC39, and then some delegates picked up the proposal because they've been convinced by those other people that started writing proposals, and they're slowly progressing it through all these stages.
That's fantastic. Great. That's unfortunately all the time we have for questions, but they're around for the rest of the day. I have 2 questions and then we'll dismiss. And I think for the sake of time, I have one of you answer each question, and you can decide amongst yourselves who. But the first question, because everyone here is a JavaScript developer, this is a JavaScript conference. What is one very powerful tool that is a language feature that maybe not everybody knows about, that they should know about, that they can take to work and use daily?
You mean about the JavaScript language itself?
Yes. Something that TC39 would know, but we likely wouldn't. You whispered something into the mic.
Generators are my like most powerful feature I've ever used. Even if I've ever used like them maybe 3 times,
Okay.
but whenever, like they were also the perfect tool for what I needed at the time.
I'm not sure it's a feature, but like how JavaScript works, if you know the event loop itself, it's pretty rad, if you
Okay.
ask me.
So generators knowing the event loop. Ujwal, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
He already answered. Quickly, I feel that atomics are very underused in JavaScript, and I can understand why they're hard to use, but I think a lot of us write applications that could really benefit from atomics. Because a lot of operations that we're doing are very like async and all over the place, and sometimes you need atomicity. Like if you're committing something to a database, you would absolutely need that operation to either pass or fail, but not
Be in between.
yeah.
Okay, excellent. So generators, atomics, and knowing the event loop. Final question. I'd love it if you could answer this, Aditi. What are you most excited for in the upcoming JavaScript language specification? And then we'll dismiss for lunch.
Temporal.
Temporal?
Yes.
What is that for the rest of us?
Okay, so how many of you have had problems with date in JavaScript? That's almost everyone. So we are fixing that. We have a proposal called Temporal. It's in stage 3. So we identified all the problems that
All of
exist
them.
with, yes, all of them that exist with date, and solve those with Temporal. And you're going to be seeing it soon.
Excellent. 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 This has been so good. Keep it going for the experts. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're about to